Hello, this is the Advanced Higher Business Management SQA Revision Support video as part of the Forth Valley and West Lothian Regional Improvement Collaborative's Easter online offering. The learning intentions of today's video is to consolidate our knowledge on command words and answering techniques at Advanced Higher Business Management. You'll know you'll have achieved that learning intention if you can distinguish between command words using the SQA marking schemes and practicing past paper questions. In March 2022, the SQA updated their guidance for the 2022 exam diet. For some courses, SQA have published information on which broad topics, context or content will or will not be assessed in this year's exam. This will help you to plan revision and focus more on the parts of the course that will be in the exam. You can still use your knowledge of other parts of the course when developing your answers to questions. For some courses, SQA have published study guides to help you practice answering exam questions. These give hints and tips on how to approach different types of questions, including how to gain marks. And in a small number of courses, you will be allowed to prepare a short study note that you can take with you into the exam. So in the case of Advanced Higher Business Management, the SQA have published information or a list of content that will or will not be in this year's exam. So at the start of the year, we had notification of topics that would not be assessed in the 2022 exam. And then further on the 7th of March, we've had confirmation of content that will be assessed in this year's exam. Throughout the lesson, you will see various symbols on the slides to indicate what you should do whilst watching the slide. Here are the symbols which may be used and what they mean. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Advanced Higher Business Management exam. The question paper is made up out of 80 marks and is 2 hours and 45 minutes in duration. It's made up of Section 1 and Section 2. Section 1 is 40 marks worth using a stimulus, which is your case study. This is usually on a large business. It contains combinations of text, diagrams and financial information in the form of exhibits. And then your Section 2 again is worth 40 marks and has 4 mandatory questions worth 10 marks each. These 10-mark questions could be made up of 1 or more parts ranging in value from 2 to 10 marks. So for example, you could have the first question which is worth 4 marks and then question B which would be worth 6 marks. So as I mentioned on the previous slide, the SQA have provided a list of content from the course that will be assessed in the 2022 exam. I've inserted this picture of the information that is being assessed in this year's exam, but this is also available on the SQA website and I'm going to give you a short demo of how you can find that if it's not already been shared with you. So you would just go to a new Google tab, type in Advanced Higher Business Management and go directly to the SQA subject page. So this takes you to the subject page for Advanced Higher Business Management. It's the first option when you type it into Google. Then you want to click in the tab that says 2022 Revision Support for Learners, and you'll know it's the right one because it's been published March 2022. Then if you click within this link, it'll open a PDF. There's a little bit of an explanation, and then there's a list of content that will be assessed in the exam. Any content that's being assessed in the exam has been highlighted with a star next to it or an asterisk next to it. So, now that we know the content being assessed in this year's exam, we're going to have a look at the command words that you need to be aware of and confident in answering for Advanced Higher Business Management. Command words, in case you're not already aware, you should be familiar with them by this point in your course, but just in case you're not, Command words tell us how we should answer the question. So if you do not do this correctly, then you'll either lose marks or not be able to gain full marks in that question. So it's really important that we understand what's being expected of us in terms of our answering techniques for every single type of question. Command words questions at Advanced Higher Business often contain two parts, so require you to address two things to show relationships between elements. So for example, the role of X in the process of Y, or the impact on A of the measures shown in Exhibit B. General marks can be awarded for descriptions, but you should never rely upon these as they are awarded at the discretion of the markers. So I think it's really important that you get into the habit of just describing the elements that are within questions anyway, just in case you can get general marks for these. As I say, these shouldn't be relied upon, so always answer to the correct amount of marks depending on the command word. Labels should be used. So unlike at Higher Business where we discourage you from using labels, because if you get the label incorrect then you lose the mark, at Advanced Higher Business we encourage labels. So for example, when talking about Belbin's team roles or roles of a manager, or to signpost your marker towards advantages and disadvantages of a concept. Here are all of the Advanced Higher Business command words. The blue column is the command words that have been carried over from Higher Business, and you should be familiar with them. We're going to go through them anyway, just to reiterate what they mean and what's expected, but just be aware that although these have been carried over from Higher Business, because they're at Advanced Higher, you should note that you are expected to write more. So what would consist of a described question at Higher Business, you're going to need a bit more at Advanced Higher because there's more course content. Then we have our command words that are new at Advanced Higher, which are evaluate, explore, and analyse. So we're going to look at these and how we answer these as well. We're going to look at all of these command words and previous exam questions. We're going to look at model answers and talk about how these should be answered. I've also provided a few hints and tips along the way to help you remember how to answer these questions. So our first command word is describe. Again, this is something you should already be familiar with from Higher Business, but just in case you have forgotten or need reminding, describe questions ask you to provide a thoroughly developed answer to demonstrate understanding, detailing factual points and key features of concepts. So I always remember that describe questions are a bit like trying to teach someone who knows absolutely nothing about that topic what it is. Or I sometimes also remember it's like trying to teach a baby or a toddler how to do something or how to understand something. You need to be really, really clear and really obvious about the key features or concepts. So let's look at an example of a described question. Be aware that you get no marks for identifying or naming in described questions at Advanced Higher. You'll get 1 mark per accurate description and then 1 mark per further development point. So describe the contingency theory of management. The contingency theory of management develops on the ideas of systems theory and believes there is no one correct method or theory that ensures success, as every business will have different needs. So this is describing the main key feature of contingency theory of management. So it's being really explicit and really specific about what it is and what it means. Then it goes on to give a development mark. So the contingency theory of management revolves around the consideration of internal and external factors and how these impact management in their decision making. So this is a description of another key feature, and that's where the development mark has been gained. So be aware that you need to describe, so talk in detail about key features or factual points relating to concepts. Moving on to our next command word at Advanced Higher Business. Again, it's one you're already familiar with. It's discuss questions. Discuss questions require you to describe strengths and weaknesses to convey a weighted argument, using linking words like however and furthermore. I always try to remember that discuss questions are like having an argument with myself on the page. So trying to kind of display weighted points for and against any concepts. Now, I'll explain why I've got this burger down here, because this helps me remember the technique for answering a discuss question. I imagine that each piece of bread is an advantage or a disadvantage, and then this burger in the middle is something that you need in order for that burger to stick together or be a nice burger. So I imagine that this is the glue that holds this advantage and this disadvantage together. And this is the linking word, like however or furthermore. So I would have a fully described advantage as my first bit of bread. Then in the middle, I would have my linking word, like however or furthermore, to glue it together. Then I would have a further, either advantage or a disadvantage, and that together creates an answer for a discuss question depending on how many marks that's worth. That may or may not work for you. I might sound a little bit daft talking about burgers for discuss questions. You can use sandwiches as well, but whatever works for you, that's what helps me. Now, it's really important to understand that at advanced hire business, discuss questions can be one-sided. So at hire, you're always expected to discuss costs and benefits. At advanced hire, it's really important to note that you can be asked to only discuss benefits or only to discuss costs. And you would just answer that in the same way as a normal discuss, but using linking words furthermore. As opposed to however. So you're not trying to counteract your previous argument, you're trying to support it. With discuss questions, you gain 1 mark per correct description of a strength or a weakness and 1 mark per development point. So let's look at an example. Discuss the impact of e-commerce on the marketing department. And again, this is this 2-part question coming into play at advanced hire business. So you're asked to discuss the impact of e-commerce. That's the first thing that the question is asking you to do. But then it increases the difficulty by being more specific and asking you to consider the impact on the marketing department. So without that part of the question, it might be considered quite an easy question. But the way that it's made an advanced hire question is adding this marketing department in. So it's a 2-parter. So you need to consider 2 things. Right, so the way that you would answer this is by fully describing, so giving a description of advantages and disadvantages of using e-commerce from the point of view of the marketing department. So we've got the marketing department can benefit from e-commerce as they are able to gather customer data based on browsing habits, which can highlight products performing poorly and allow them to promote these in order to increase sales. Then we've directly contrasted our advantage, and we're going to talk now about a disadvantage. So using that linking word, which is our bit in the middle, however, it means the marketing department must be innovative in their website design and online advertising to ensure they are setting themselves apart from competitors, as competitors are easily able to copy the techniques on publicly available websites. So that would gain you 2 marks because you've got a fully described advantage and then a fully described disadvantage, and you use that linking word in between, and that's you having a coherent weighted argument with yourself. Moving on to our next command word, it's explain. Explain questions ask you to make relevant points and explain how they impact the business in either a positive or a negative way. So in other words, asking yourself the question, does it hinder the business? Does it make things more difficult? Or does it help the business? Does it make things easier or more positive? Now, for explain questions, you gain 1 mark per valid explanation, and again, 1 mark per development point. With explain questions, I find it's easy to, or rather helpful to remember key phrases that force you to think about how the business is impacted. So I tend to go with the phrase, this means that, but you can use alternatives like that to this phrase, like this could result in, or this could lead to. Also, at advanced hire business, you are asked to explain the impact sometimes on not just the business, but you could be asked to explain the impact on a business's functional departments, like in this question, or on a business's stakeholders. So let's look at an example from the 2019 paper. Explain the use of Kurt Lewin's stages of change model to assist the effective management of change within organisations. So again, it's that two-part element of advanced hire business questions. So explain the use of Kirk-Lewin stages of change model. That's our first part. And then we've got how does it make effective management of change? So we've got the unfreezing stage assists as it encourages management to seek multiple solutions to problems and consider which is the most suitable. Now, you've not done any explanation of impact up to that point. This is just stating the point. You then need to go on to explain the impact, whether that be in a negative or positive way on the business. So we've got in here, this could result in, or in here you could have this means that, or this could lead to. This could result in the increased chance that the change will achieve the desired outcome, so it's in a positive, it's being impacted in a positive way, as the optimal solution has been chosen out of all other alternatives. So that would get you one explain mark. Then you could go on to further develop that point, talking about how this point again would impact the business in either a positive or a negative way. So for explain questions, again, this is one of these wee top tips. I always remember what and why, what and how, and what and so what. And that kind of forces me to think about the impact, whether that be positive or negative on the business. Moving on to our first command word that's brand new at Advanced Hire Business. Evaluate questions ask you to make reasoned judgments in terms of effectiveness and usefulness of something. So you're telling me why it's effective or valuable. These are similar, I find, to justify questions at hire business, where it's asking you to give justification for a course of action or method of something that's been used. So evaluate questions ask you to describe why things are valuable. So we are going to look at an example from the 2018 paper. Evaluate the use of a Gantt chart to improve a manager's time and task management. Now, time and task management has not been assessed in the 2022 exam, but within that support document, Gantt charts are highlighted under evaluating business information. So I thought this would be a good way to kind of revise the use of Gantt charts. So, for evaluate questions, you can gain potential description marks. So if you describe the term within the question, then there is a chance that you'll get a description mark. Again, no guarantee because these are added on at the end, but it's always worth describing. It gives yourself a reminder of what you're talking about, is it? So we've got Gantt charts were created by Henry Gantt for project management and plot order and time for tasks within a large-scale project. Then we go on to say why they're effective or useful. Gantt charts are effective as they allow a manager to compare estimated versus actual budgets taken to complete tasks, which can improve budgeting in future as they learn from the Gantt chart. So you've said it's effective, then you've directly said why it is effective or useful. Then, as a second answer, we've got Gantt charts also allow for managers to identify tasks which can be done simultaneously, which can help increase efficiency where employees can be working on various parts of the project at the same time. Again, we have said what it allows the business to do or managers to do, so we've said why it's effective or useful, and then exactly why that is effective or useful. So again, you're getting 1 mark per each evaluation of effectiveness. Moving on to explore questions. Now, explore questions expect you to carry out a detailed examination or inquiry or follow a process to find something out. Now, again, for explore questions, you can gain 1 mark for each valid point, 1 mark for development points. Now, for explore questions, you can talk about key features of concepts, advantages or disadvantages. So unlike with a discuss question or an evaluate question, you can only really talk about, so for discuss, you can only talk about advantages and disadvantages depending on the question. Evaluate tends to more be talking about the positive things in a concept. Explore questions, you can describe key features, talk about advantages or disadvantages. So let's have a look at an example from the 2018 paper. Explore the relevance of contingency theory of management to UK organisations today. So the way that you would approach this is you would create a link between the key features of the contingency theory of management and how that relates to UK organisations today. So we'll look at this example answer. Organisations which combine production and service may adopt different approaches in each area, as the production will be suited to elements of classical management, whereas the service sector uses a more human relations approach, allowing employees to work in teams and be empowered. So it's talking about the key feature of the fact that contingency theory thinks that there's no correct fit for any organisation, and that organisations use a combination of all management theory in order to manage. So that is kind of the main point of our explore question, is using the key features and talking about how they relate to the organisation in the UK today. Then we're given an example which further supports the understanding. So for example, in a restaurant, staff are allowed to use their own initiative when dealing with customers, but must comply with strict procedures in other areas, for example, the kitchen. So they've said how it relates to human relations approach, and then given an example of how it relates to classical management. So it's supporting the fact that contingency theory relies on the fact that there's no best fit for any organisation, and that organisations will kind of pick and choose depending on internal and external factors. Right, moving on now to compare questions. Now, compare questions are, again, you should be familiar with from higher business. These make clear links to similarities and differences of concepts. So talking about how things are either the same or different. So our example is to compare a classical management approach with a human relation approach, which we kind of did in the previous question, but we'll look at it as a compare question. Very important to note for compare questions that you only receive 1 mark per whole comparison. Lots of people make the mistake of thinking that describing one key feature of one of the things that you've been asked to compare gains you 1 mark. It does not, because then you have not answered the question properly. You haven't compared, you've only described. So you need to make sure that you're talking about 2 things in detail, so making a comparison between those 2 things, and that gains you 1 mark. So we're going to look at this example answer. Operational level workers are not involved in the decision-making process with a classical management approach, as decisions are made by top-level managers. Then I always use the linking word whereas for compare questions, and that's if you're talking about differences, but if you're talking about similarities, you could say and. Whereas a human relations approach encourages participation by all employees in the decision-making process. So we'll see that this gains us 1 mark because it's a correct comparison. Equally important to remember for compare questions is that you must compare like for like. What I mean by that is 2 of the same things must be compared with each other. So within this answer, we have decision making compared with decision making. You couldn't or wouldn't get a mark if you had talked about motivation for classical management approaches and decision making for human relation approaches. This is because they are not like for like concepts. You would need to compare decision making with decision making and motivation with motivation. Moving on now to our last command word at Advanced Higher Business, it's analyse. Now, I've put this with the force field analysis title because analyse questions, as I look through historical examples of Advanced Higher Business past papers, analyse questions tend to always go hand in hand with force field analysis, which would make sense because we have force field analysis within the title. So, usually the question will appear with the word analyse at the beginning, so you're analysing a decision that a business has made within the case study, and then you're asked to include a force field analysis diagram within your answer. Just to recap, in case anyone is unsure, a business uses force field analysis before implementing decisions in the change process. You will have studied this in the internal business environment whilst looking at the managing change processes. This technique assesses potential forces for and against change. We know these for the concept of force field analysis as drivers and resistors. Now, you need to be able to analyse a business decision by drawing a force field analysis diagram and explaining why you think drivers and resistors are as such. So again, there's a two-part element of advanced higher business questions. Drawing the force field analysis diagram, then explaining why you think drivers are drivers and resistors are resistors. So we're going to look at a recap of a force field analysis diagram, how it should look, what the elements on it are, and then we're going to look at an example question. So, just to recap, your force field analysis diagram should start with your equilibrium line down the middle. Then it should have your drivers and your resistors. Your drivers should be on the left-hand side and your resistors on the right-hand side. Then you should have your arrows of varying lengths which touch your equilibrium line. Finally, you should have your assets for change under your drivers, resistors and equilibrium. So, our equilibrium is the current situation, and this is depicted as a straight line, right down the middle. Your assets for change are organisational strengths that will help a firm when it tries to change, but doesn't actually cause it to change. So, quite often, candidates will confuse assets for change with drivers. Consider whether when you're thinking about assets for change and drivers, if an asset for change is something that the business are currently doing well, that means that it's a strength, it's a business strength, therefore it should fall under assets for change as opposed to a driver. Your arrows should point inwards and vary in length depending on the strength of your drivers and your resistors and should touch your equilibrium line. For change to occur, drivers need to be greater than resistors, and to control, drivers must be increased or resistors weakened. So we're going to look at a force field analysis past paper question from the SQA website. So we're looking at the company Vodafone, and we're asked to analyse, so there's the command word, analyse drivers and resistors of Vodafone's decision to continue its expansion into India. Your response must include a force field diagram. So we'll see this is worth 8 marks. So it's really important that we know how to answer these types of questions, these analyse questions, because they are big hitters. They're worth 8 marks. And again, we'll see the two-part element of advanced higher business questions in here. So we've got to analyse the drivers and resistors of Vodafone's decision. This is the first part. And then the second part is to include your force field diagram. Now it's split right down the middle, 4 marks for each element of that question. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 2 minutes to read through the case study excerpt from the SQA website, and then we're going to look at how we would approach answering this question. So I'll start your 2 minutes now. Okay, let's discuss how we would begin to answer this question and what's expected. So, as you can see here, there are 4 marks awarded for your diagram. Your diagram must contain 2 correct drivers, 2 correct resistors, an asset for change, correct labels and arrows of varying lengths that touch the equilibrium line. Then you receive 4 further marks for analysing why drivers are drivers and resistors are resistors. Then you can gain, if you've not done any of these parts fully, 1 possible mark for making an overall conclusion. So for example, the decision was good because and the decision was bad because. And you need to do that that's based on your drivers and resistors. So let's have a look at the SQA marking scheme for this question. As I said, you receive 1 mark for having 2 correct drivers. So in order for a driver to be correct, it needs to be used from the case study. You need to have an arrow under the driver. The arrow must be touching the equilibrium line and it must be of varying lengths. So there's no limit to the amount of drivers or resistors that you can have in each column, but you need at least 2 correct ones in order to gain that mark for your drivers. So having read the case study, the first driver that is expected in the marking scheme is a rapidly growing market. Now, it's been identified that this is a fairly strong driver, although it's not the strongest, because the strongest could potentially be young and expanding populations. It is important to note that force field analysis diagrams can be subject to opinion. So just because this is the marking scheme doesn't mean that your arrows have to be the exact same lengths. It's subject to opinion. And as long as you can explain why you've put the arrow length, the length that you have, then that's fine. Then you need 2 correct resistors in order to gain your resistors mark. You need 1 asset for change in order to receive your asset for change mark. However, I would never ever encourage you to only write 1 asset for change. Always write more assets for change than 1, just in case the one that you do write is incorrect. Then you receive your final mark for correct labels, so drivers, resistors, your equilibrium, and assets for change. Never forget your assets for change. People tend to only focus on these 3 labels. You need this label in there, so the asset for change label, in order to gain full marks. In order to gain this mark, you also need arrows of varying lengths, so to represent the strengths of drivers and resistors, and making sure the arrows touch the equilibrium. Right, that would gain your 4 marks. Then you go on to try and achieve the next 4 marks. So you're gaining 1 mark per valid analysed point, and the way that helps me remember how to kind of do this part of the question is to justify the line of importance given. So tell me why that driver is important, or tell me why the resistor is a resistor. So the first one we have is the rapidly growing market, which we identified as our first driver. So this is a driver because lots of customers who do not yet own a mobile phone means lots of potential customers, so it drives the business to change. Then we have young and expanding populations. Now this tends to be the types of consumers who buy mobile phones and use data. So it's directly stating why the driver is a driver, explaining why, what about that driver is forcing the business to change or could encourage the business to change. Then we do the exact same for our resistors, so talk about difficult regulations, price caps for roaming. That's a driver because it limits Vodafone's potential revenues. Then again, we have a resistor as increased service tax. Why is it a resistor to Vodafone? Because it means they have to pay more to operate in India. So you would go through your drivers and resistors, pick 2 from your diagram and explain why they're drivers and why they are resistors. That concludes our command word consolidation for Advanced Higher Business Management. I'm now going to show you a useful resource that you can use to aid your revision. It's a publicly available website that's run by the SQA. It's Understand the Standards, and I'm just going to demo how you find it. So again, just open up a Google tab and type in Understanding Standards. It's your first option, give it a click, Drop down this subject option and select business management. As you can see, all of your subjects are on there, so you can use it for subjects beyond business. Then along here you'll see the levels, so click advanced higher. Always takes a wee minute. Question paper. And you can see previous candidate responses to questions from the 2016 paper, as well as a marker commentary, so why markers have awarded marks or deducted marks. Now, I imagine you have used this to complete your projects, but it was just to make you aware that it's also available to see kind of previous. There's an example of a force field analysis diagram. Let's spot what's wrong. They've not got an equilibrium label. But apart from that, that is a very strong force field analysis diagram. So you can go and you can see previous responses to questions, which is very helpful. And then here's our analysis of why drivers are drivers. So that's just to make you aware of that resource, that you can use it because it's publicly available. Next steps for your revision for the Advanced Higher Business Management exam. You can use the information learned on command words today and apply them to your course revision. So although we have looked a little bit at course revision today and talking about our command words, you can use this PowerPoint or video in conjunction with your course revision to try and apply the knowledge that we've talked about. As well as that, you can watch the video on the Forth Valley West Lothian Regional Improvement Collaborative's YouTube channel going over content being assessed in the exam. This can be found, as I said, on the YouTube channel, and that is an in-depth look at all of the content being assessed in this year's exam based on the support that was provided by the SQA at the beginning of March. Today was to consolidate our knowledge on command words and answering techniques at Advanced Higher Business. And you should have achieved that learning intention if you can now distinguish between command words using the SQA marking schemes and practicing past paper questions, which we did all throughout this video. Thank you very much for watching this video. This was the Advanced Higher Business Management SQA Revision Support video as part of the Forth Valley and West Lothian Regional Improvement Collaborative's online Easter School offering. You can revise more of Advanced Higher Business Management via the Forth Valley and West Lothian Regional Improvement Collaborative's YouTube channel, or you can revise for your other subjects on the same YouTube channel, focusing on support for the SQA exam. Thank you.